Hi guys, it's Christy and I'm going to be doing part 2 of my outlining video. This is the flexible outline for pantsers. So I have heard so many people, especially on YouTube, describe themselves as pantsers, which, you know, writers are very creative people, so that does make sense. But for me personally, I could not write without an outline. I could not write without some kind of guidance in the beginning. You know what I mean? If I were to just sit down in front of a computer and start writing, there is no way that it would be a consistent story throughout. And I just feel like I would write draft after draft after draft because I would have to, right? It would be such a mess. But kudos to you if you can. Honestly, if you can stay consistent throughout and you don't need an outline, that is amazing, and I would love to hear more about it. Let me know what your strategy is because maybe I can learn from you. So I know for a lot of pantsers out there, the idea of outlining seems so daunting, and maybe you're just not maybe your brain just doesn't work that way and that you don't like to organize everything in advance, and that's totally fine. But I do think that outlining has the potential to be really beneficial to you. Just making some of these decisions beforehand for days, particularly days when you don't feel like writing, when you don't feel creative, you know what I'm saying? That you can still be productive because you've already made these decisions ahead of time. And then the other benefit is that I feel like your consistency will really improve in your novel because you're making sure to document those things that you definitely want in there, those themes, those conflicts, those, you know, character developments and things like that you've already made those decisions. And so you can, you know, as you're writing and as you're being creative and letting yourself, you know, letting your creativity flow, you can look back to that outline and use it to help you and guide you still, if that makes sense. So the reason I feel like I consider myself a bit of a plotter and pantser hybrid is because while I have to have an outline, I absolutely have to have an outline. It always changes as I'm writing, or I'll be doing a scene. I'll always think of other stuff, you know, and it's of course never as I'm writing. It's always later, of course, as I'm reading it back, or, you know, in the like I said in the last video, in the shower, driving, walking. Those are like the only 3 things apparently that I do. But as I'm doing these things, I come up with new ideas or new, you know, just different elements of the story that I want in there. And so things will change. And so even though I have everything structured in advance, my creativity still wants to burst in there and make changes and mess things up. So, so for that reason, I think I'm a little bit of a hybrid, but probably more on the plotter side of things. Okay. So in the last video, I broke everything out piece by piece of how to do this, how to do the outline. So I'm not going to go into all the pieces. If you haven't watched part 1, I'm going to link it down below so you can watch that first and then come back. But okay, so the first part that I mentioned about defining what your story is about, if you're a pantser, this is still just as important. You have to have this before you can get started. It's just really going to help keep your story cohesive and make sure that you're telling it from beginning to end, you know, that it doesn't go off track and you don't start with one story and end with a completely different story. Okay, so the 3-act structure, while you don't need to be as defined if you are a pantser, and especially, you know, with that middle, if you like to kind of see where it goes, I definitely recommend that you at least have your beginning and end figured out. Again, it's going to make sure that you don't get off track and that you don't start with one story and end with another. Post-its, I think, will be helpful for pantsers to define more of the milestones and those benchmark scenes that you want in the book. I just think that they're going to help kind of pave that road for you to be creative. I think you can be even actually more creative when you sort of have a basic outline. So I think if you have that basic structure lined out, you know, maybe like 7 milestones. I just pulled that number out of the air, but you know, a decent amount of milestones in there that you can kind of tell what story is being formulated here, but it still gives you room to be creative throughout. I think is ideal. Another thing I wanted to say about the brainstorming process, while I do think it's beneficial to take some time and brainstorm your story before you start writing, this doesn't mean that you can't write while you are brainstorming. Like, for example, and this is what I did, a certain scene will come to mind. I'm not just gonna like waste that creativity and just be like, oh no, I'm not there yet. No. I will write that scene down. I will take some loose leaf paper and I will write that down and I'll put it into a binder, and I'll definitely come back when I'm drafting and I'll make sure and transcribe or transpose that scene, into my document. And so as far as characters, I have a feeling that pantsers are going to be more like, no. I am not doing all that work ahead of time. I want to get to know my characters as I'm writing, and that's totally fine. Whatever floats your boat. But I just think, just for me, from personal experience, it's just been so much easier when I kind of have a general idea of who my character is before I start writing. At the very minimum, just think about what your character looks like, the description and stuff like that. If nothing else, having that written down somewhere, what your character looks like, is going to be helpful when you're writing, to make sure that, their eye color doesn't change from like chapter to chapter. It starts out as blue and then it's brown, or, their height or something like that. It's just going to be, as far as consistency, I just think it's a good idea to have those basic things written down and figured out ahead of time. So after doing, your post-its and your characters and everything, if you're feeling like, okay, I want to go further with this, I want to start breaking this out into scenes and everything, then great, and if you don't, that's totally fine too. I think having those, like I said, major milestones at least defined is really going to help you out. I think as long as you have those major milestones figured out, then you're ready to start writing. Go ahead, go for it. So here's where the flexible outline comes into play. If you've done the work of defining your scenes and writing those down, and you start writing and new stuff comes to you, whole new scenes or whole new narrative strands or whatever it is, you can update your outline. It is okay to do that. What I like to do if something changes while I'm writing is I update my outline, and I, will make a note, like maybe I'll highlight it so that I know that this is a change. Particularly if something comes to me and I've already written scenes that are contrary to that new idea, I will just keep writing, and then when I do my next round of revision, I'll just make the update as necessary. So that way I can still be, new ideas can still be coming to me, but it's not going to ruin everything. It's not going to make me have to stop what I'm doing, start over again, or like rewrite scenes or whatever. I can just make notes in that outline that I already have, and then just come back to it and make the changes later. Okay, so one thing I wanted to say about making changes. So as a self-proclaimed perfectionist, I know how dangerous it can be constantly coming up with new ideas and having to revise to accommodate these new ideas. So one thing I wanted to mention is just that you need to set a boundary with yourself about how much change is too much and where you're going to draw the line. So what I recommend is going back to that what is my story about stage at the very beginning that I mentioned. And this is where it really is beneficial. If this new idea changes what my story was originally about, then I know that it's too much, okay? That's not the same story, that maybe that's a different novel that I want to write later on. If my new idea changes that initial story that I wanted to tell, then I know that it's not a good change for this novel and it doesn't belong here right now. So I can note it down in a notebook and come back to it later if I really want to. But for me, that's just where that boundary is. And I recommend thinking about that if that comes up, because it'll really save you from, falling into that revision, never-ending revision cycle. So I'm hoping that some of these strategies will really help you pantsers out there and just sort of give you some sort of groundwork and foundation for your novel, something that you can reference in those times that you get a little bit stuck, or maybe you feel like you're kind of going off track. You can go back to that and see those ideas that you had, see that story that you wanted to tell, and just make sure that you're telling it. So do you have any outlining strategies that are different from mine? Please let me know. I really am curious. Maybe I can learn some new things for my next project. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful to some of you out there. Before you leave, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss future videos. And until next time, bye.